My book, The Spirit of Work, Timeless Wisdom, Current Realities, is now published. By interweaving science, business, and sacred texts from the world's great spiritual traditions, The Spirit of Work offers a high-level but approachable way to view and structure work from individual, community, and institutional perspectives. As part of the book's reach and outreach, I will be adding some solo podcasts and interviews with authors who write to build healthy workplaces, to give you a taste of how the book's concepts can enhance your workplace experience. To get to the Spirit of Work links and purchase from online stores directly, click on the online store of your choice from my website, which is shiftworkplace.com/the Spirit of Work. Make sure you put hyphens in between the words the Spirit of Work to ensure the correct URL comes up. So that's shiftworkplace.com/the Spirit of Work with hyphens. And that's how you'll get to your goal. Looking forward to your feedback. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I have the honor of presenting to you a guest whose name is Chidi Iwuchukwu, and he is the team manager with Mirka Care Services. He was the Humanitarian Services Director for the Igbo Cultural Association of Edmonton and a client service representative at Edmonton's Food Bank. He is currently the chairman of the Edmonton Igbo School Board and the director of the Edgemont Community League. Chidi is an Amazon #1 international best-selling author, and the name of his book is Coming to Canada, The Ultimate Success Guide for New Immigrants and Travelers. It is a wonderful, well-researched, and readable book that should be everybody's handbook for coming to Canada and getting established from before you arrive up to 5 years later. So I'm really happy to be able to present Chidi to you today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Chidi, tell the audience a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what you do, a little bit about your family.
So my name is Chidi. I originally from Nigeria. I am a husband, a dad of 3 boys. I live in Edmonton and I have been here for almost 6 years right now. I work with Mirka Care Services as a team manager. In that role, I lead a team of very dedicated people working to support those with intellectual disability and developmental delays. I have been passionate about the immigration process and how to improve it and how it impacts the newcomers, especially on their mental health. But that passion has been translated into making the process so easy that I've come up with this book, Coming to Canada, The Ultimate Success Guide for New Immigrants and Travelers.
Oh, that's great. Now, you came originally from a banking background. How did you make that switch from banking to disability care management and writing? That seems to be 3 very different professions.
So I had been a banker for quite a number of years, and I met this gentleman when I came to Canada in one of the interviews I went to. And he when we were chatting before the interview proper, he made allusion to the fact that this was his 6th career. And I was taken aback, and I'm like, wow, where I come from, you stay on one thing and you keep doing it forever. On our way back, I just told my companion, I said, that's a man who's lived quite a rounded life. He's been an accountant. He's done work in law. He's done work at that particular moment, he was a recruiter, and he's done these things all successfully. One of the things that made me switch from banking, obviously, is that I got to the point where I was really, really bored. There are a couple of personal things that happened in my life, and I felt that given another chance, and God gave me another chance, that I should work with those on the margin of society as a way to give back and as a way to find added fulfillment beyond the figures and the numbers in banking. That is what made me make that switch. And then obviously it's the same trend that has carried me into helping to solve the problem of people who are coming into Canada, who do not understand what coming to Canada entails, what the challenges are, what the maize court settlements comprise of by writing my book.
That's great. People often feel when they reach a certain point in their careers that it doesn't have the same purpose and meaning it did initially. And sometimes they're able to switch into something different. Sometimes they just move within that career. But you made a pretty significant switch to support people who are on the outside How's that been for you?
It's been the most fulfilling thing I've done, working with these people. Every day we pray to make a difference in people's life. I see the work I do as making a difference in people's life when these people, some of them don't have families again, some of them have been disconnected from their roots, and you come in and you come every day, show up, telling them that they can be the best they can, believe in them. Many of them don't have anybody to believe in them again. And here you come in telling them that things can be different. The most fulfilling thing I can tell you I've ever done in my life. I don't have any regrets being here.
That's wonderful. So let's go back into your childhood a little bit and tell me about a couple of incidents that were formative for you as a child that you think helped to make you into the person you are today.
So growing up, I had a dad who had a background in the military. So what that meant for us was that he was very disciplined. We were brought up in a kind of law and order family. So my dad will always be this person who believes that you need to do things and you need to do them right. Growing up, among my peers, I was the only person who had a timetable to do stuff. So when I come back from school, I had to go take siesta. I had to do the things that were laid down already for me. So more or less, as a youngster, I rebelled against all of that because I thought my friends were all having more fun than I had at the time. One of the particular things I remember was my dad telling me, your decision determines your destiny. It stopped me because over the course of my life, I realized that the decisions I've made had determined where I ended up, So at the time he said it, I felt that it was just one of those things that anybody said. But I realized that at each point, the decisions I took determined where I ended up. So that's one of the things that I remember about my childhood that I could say is very formative. I also remembered was I come from this cultural, rural Nigeria where we teach our children a lot of stories and myths and folklores. And so my mom waking me up early in the morning when she has concerns about my behavior and about the things that she wants me to change was quite a big deal for me. Because at that particular moment, I know that somebody waking you up by 5 a.m., for example, to say, I want to have a chat with you, you know that it's coming and it's a heart-to-heart talk. And my mom, my grandma were two people in this whole wide world that I didn't want to disappoint. So those were also very important. Now, talking about my grandma, this is one person in the whole world who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And so I never disappointed her, never had cause to give her to spank me, whether verbally or literally, was a big deal for me. So these three people, my dad, my mom, and my grandma, were very involved.
Mm-hmm. Your dad provided the disciplinary and a calendar schedule for you. And your mother provided you with the stories that would help you to reach further. And your grandmother gave you the confidence and the belief in yourself to succeed.
Absolutely. So within the boundaries of these reinforcements, I became what I am today.
Those are really great stories. Thanks for sharing them. Now, everybody's born into groups. So, like you said, being in a rural community is a group and it has certain implications. And then typically people are born into some kind of tribal or ethnic affiliations, national. They have religious affiliations. They have lots of different groups that they're born into that they didn't have any say over. They just happen to be born into those groups and they pick things up from that. And on reflection, it's possible to think, well, how did those groups influence me and how did they form me? So what are some of the groups that really influenced you that you were born into and how were they formative for you as a leader?
I think my immediate family, my parents didn't fail to drive it into me and to emphasize it for me over the course of growing up that I am the first. Therefore, I am somebody that will be looked upon for leadership. And therefore, I had to get my ass together. So that idea that I am the first, I need to take charge, I need to provide leadership, I need to solve problems, I need to creatively find ways around challenges. Have everywhere I go, it's been the same thing, right? So I am always the person that will always find a way to solve problems that come up in the family or in the workplace, and the person who thinks about situations a little more differently and a little more deeply to find a solution to it. And it's all boiled down from that. You are the first, therefore you can't afford to make mistakes, not in the sense of piling up too much pressure and not allowing me to have a life, but in the sense that you have been born with a level of responsibility and you need to live up to it. It's that leadership imperative that have been inculcated in me that have guided me even today in the work that I do. So most times people see me as a take charge kind of person. In some of the organizations I've worked, I've had remarks saying, oh, Chidi is there, and therefore we're comfortable that things are in order.
So you were born into this role of being someone who was reminded that others are looking at you to be an example.
Absolutely.
And you wanted to make sure that you were a good example to look up to. And that's something that you've continued to emulate throughout your life. Sounds like you also have developed some ways of thinking about the big picture, like to be more systematic because you've been in managerial roles most of your life, to think of the situation that you have a group of people to take care of and that there's certain systems that need to be in place for that to work. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it right. I've been this big vision kind of person and trying to make sure that everybody understands where we're heading to. That's very, very important to me. And so because of my career, learn how to build consensus, in carrying everybody towards that shared vision. Actually, for every team I've managed, one of the first things I do to make sure that we understand exactly what the vision is, where we're heading to, and how we're going to get there, and what is in it for everybody. And then over the course of my career, I've then learned how to allow people the freedom to make their own contributions to bring up their skills towards that shared vision, and not just telling them every day what to do. I would share the vision. This is what we want to do. This is where we're heading to. And then I allow people to bring their skills, their passion, their emotions into the work to make sure that we achieve those visions. Yep.
Because Nigeria is a collectivist society, so building harmonious relationships would be really important. But at the same time, it's a very hierarchical society.
Yes, it is in a sense. The part of Nigeria where I come from actually cannot be totally said to be hierarchical. We are more like decentralized, okay? However, there are leaders emerge in the rural traditional sort of way from showing competence and expertise in their way in certain aspects of life. So, for example, you could see that if somebody is a hunter, for example, but he could be the leader because he's an honest hunter. He's somebody who has been proven over time to perfected his skills, his acts, and people can rely on him. Where I come from, integrity in the public service or in leadership is something that is very, very important, at least at that time. And so you could see those who were not in so much of glamorous occupations, but they're providing the leadership in the community. They are building that consensus. They're rallying people around for the things that needs to be done.
Right. So they had cultural capital and they had moral capital. They had influence because of those things, whether they had a high status position or not.
Yes, absolutely. The leadership then is basically from the point of moral courage more than a positional imperative.
So now what about groups that you chose to belong to because you had to, grow into a profession as you were growing up, and then you also decided to immigrate to Canada, and there's Canadian society. Right now you're in the west of Canada. You're in an urban setting, and there are probably other things too because of your interests and because you have 3 sons. So of the groups that you chose to belong to, what would you say you've adopted into who you are as a leader now?
When I look back at my working career, I would say one of the things that had affected me the most was coming in contact with a former boss who is now a mentor of mine, who gave me so much freedom to work with him at the very formative level of my career. One thing that struck me was his ability to give me more responsibilities than what my experience could carry at that particular time, for example. He worked hard to remove all the mental breaks that I had to prevent me from soaring. What that then happened was I became a little bit more bold, especially in the sales part of my career as a banker. And I have taken that ability to do big things, that ability to dare things into the other things, into the other parts of my life. So coming to Canada, for example, was a huge, huge decision for me and my family. But given the background of what I have had and the challenges I have faced and conquered in the past, I felt it would be just one of those things. So meeting him in the workplace and adopting his leadership skills, seeing how he helped me with knowing that there are no limits except those I place on myself. For example, you can imagine a boss coming in, calling you into his office and saying, listen, my seat is vacant. Just consider that this seat is vacant and you could step into it. However, you need to prove yourself.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
That's called promoting yourself out of a job is what everybody should be doing, really.
Yeah.
You move on to something else, but you've groomed other people to take that spot.
And he was very sincere about it. He wasn't just telling me because he just wants to psych me up. He would tell me there are opportunities up there for you if you prove yourself. All you need to do is prove yourself. And having that kind of confidence and that kind of leadership pushing you, made me more or less pace my peers in terms of the responsibilities I took on and in terms of how my career moved further down the way. And so it's also the same thing that all of those things that have brought me to where I am today, even in Canada, with all the challenges of integration, settlement.
So I'm just wondering, what you just described is the example of a great leader who you probably emulated and took some of that person's style into your own. But I'm thinking about groups and the groups where you adopted something from the group into who you are. So for example, if you're a banker, something about banking you may have introduced into the way that you do things that you didn't have when you were born. It wasn't the same kind of group. Or it could have been the experience of moving to another country. So, for example, I've lived in several different countries and I took on some of the things from those countries or cultures I've spent a lot of time with. I frequently said spend a lot of time with Iranians. So certain cultural practices that Iranians do, I have adopted into the way I do things. And one of them is the way I greet people and the way I bring people into my home. I basically just copied what Persians do, and that's what I do now. So I wouldn't have been doing it before, but I thought it was so beautiful and I liked it so much, I brought it into my own cultural practice. Not to say that I brought everything from Persian cultural practices into what I was doing, but that particular piece about how you greet people and how you invite them into your home, for me was really significant. And I felt that it was missing from my life until I identified it and thought, this is it, I want to do that too. Is there anything like that you've adopted into the way you behave and the way you think?
Absolutely. From the background of being a banker in Nigeria, I was a very, very aggressive and assertive individual. Very aggressive in terms of the way I get stuff done. So I am a hard-charging leader who wants people who have numbers and budgets to meet. And therefore, one of the things I pasted on my wall as a bank manager was excuses I don't give, I don't accept. And that's because of the kind of high pressured and high intense environment where we work. But coming to Canada, you realize that it's a much more relaxed environment, much more calm environment, and you can't lead with that kind of assertion. You can't lead with that kind of aggressiveness. So I use this as an example. One of the things I had to relearn was communication at work, even in the family. So now, rather than asking people to do things, I ask them, do they want to do things? And it took me a while to learn the difference, right? Rather than saying, for example, Maria, please put off the light, which is what I've been used to for most part of my life. I've come to Canada now and I'm saying, Maria, do you want to put off the light? Sometimes we joke about it in my family. My kids will say, Dad, you are becoming too Canadian for us. You should tell us exactly what it is that you want to do. And then cut us. I catch myself. You see a situation where the communication style, for example, is much more different here than where I come from.
It's very indirect.
Yeah, it's very indirect.
In comparison to Nigerian communication, it's very indirect.
Absolutely. So in Nigeria, everybody knows where you stand. So you want things done, you can tell them, please do this, do that, do this, do this. But here you're putting it into like an opportunity to give people option. As a leader back home, that style of communication where people seem to have options does not exist. So I'm telling you, bring the file for me, or go see this client, or pull up that for me, do that for me, straightforward. But in Canada, I can't do that. If I do that, I'll have a conversation with HR.
Well, it is probably good to blend the two because, if it's a question of just getting a file, it's a little confusing to people if they're not really sure what you're asking. I need this file. Can you get that for me? I don't think people would worry about it. But if you said to them, do this job and get it right and don't mess up, now then I'd probably take offense. Here's a job. How do you see yourself getting started on it? That's probably where I'd go, okay, this is where I'd like the Canadian more indirect and, drawing people in and trying to build consensus. But if you just wanted a file, I think I'd just want you to ask me for the file.
And that's a good point you've made. The thing to note about this, especially for people who come from this background and I'm now in the Canadian system, is that there's a difference. There's a thin line between assertion and aggressiveness, right? So for Canadians who have been born with that sense of politeness, that sense of getting them to determine whether they're going to do stuff or not, when you then come in from the background of having stuff done and asking people to do them, you run the risk of tuning off a couple of people in your team, especially when you're managing a multicultural team. And the way you manage all of that, the drawing that fine line and keeping everybody happy and motivated to do the job is actually the most skillful parts of the work that I do as a manager.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So now, temperament and personality, temperament being what you're born with, you see that in children. And within a few months, you can tell that they have different temperaments and they tend to do some things more easily and other things with more difficulty. And then through overcoming obstacles or not overcoming them and then still being faced with them later, your personality develops, plus the opportunities and the experiences that you have, you develop personality around that. So what would you say is your temperament that you were born with? What kinds of things have you built on?
In terms of temperament, I think I'm more like Tori. I understand that because I'm a very passionate person. If I believe in a cause, you can be sure that I'm giving it 150% of my time and of my energy. I focus on the big picture a lot. I'm a visionary kind of person, somebody who thinks about where we are at today and where we can be in 5-6 years, for example. Where I struggle in terms of that temperament is with the details of how do we get from here to that. Mm-hmm. And that is what I've been working on to make sure that I don't get carried away by the big picture, but I also work on the details and carry everybody along as we progress on that. So in terms of confidence, I am very optimistic about the future and I'm willing to try new things. Where I struggle and, the details, for a banker, you wonder how can a former banker struggle with detail, but this is who I am. And I had worked on it and had overcome it, did a whole lot of things in terms of blending and working on my weaknesses while highlighting my strengths across the careers that I've had.
Well, that's good self-awareness to realize where you tend to go naturally and what you need to work on. But I also think when you speak about as a banker, if you're at the top of the organization, you need to be visionary. You need to not be micromanaging all the details. That's why you have employees. So if you're visionary and you inspire people and then you build consensus, as you were mentioning earlier, and you say, so how do you see this project rolling out? Or how can we make this work? Or what would your favorite contribution be, then you don't need to deal with all the details because it's not your job.
Yeah, in a sense, yes. But then again, you also need to keep people on track.
True.
And the way to keep people on track so that you deliver the projects on the due dates and you deliver the numbers is to make sure that you talk to them every day. As a retail bank manager, I had to develop a system where I track what everybody is doing on a daily basis. And I can tell you for free that was one of the most challenging things I had to do. But, getting people to send in their reports, and I review those reports every single day and make comments about each person's work. So where it's important for you to be visionary, you also need to understand how all of this work together, because sometimes sharing a vision, creating a vision might not be the only thing that needs to be done. Most of the work is done on a day-to-day basis. The ability to motivate your team, the ability to correct as you move on, the ability to identify where somebody is struggling and come in to help the person to provide clarity is actually probably what will make the difference rather than just the broader vision that you've shared.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. I mean, it's not one or the other. It's a continuum. And with some people, you will need to pay closer attention to the details, and with other people, you won't. I'm also not a detail person, so I'm really glad that there are more and more apps and programs that help manage those things so that you can see where people are at in different spots, because it is easy to let things slip through the cracks.
Yeah, that is true.
For me, it is at any rate. So can you recall a time when you became aware that your cultural understanding was just specific to your culture and not just the norm?
You bet. We've been widely traveled before we decided to settle in Canada. So we've traveled to most part of the world. I think the only continent I haven't set my foot on, well, there are two, Australia and South America, which I'm hoping that I will correct soon. So traveling around the world, you begin to see that people have different attitudes and different belief system and the ways they are doing things. So your philosophy is just what it is peculiar to the group and the place where you're coming from. The idea that this is how we do things is narrowed down to that particular area and in time and in place. I'll give you an example. Canada is a multicultural place. And one of the things I love most about Canada is getting to enjoy all these different aspects of other people's cultures. Then you begin to see that the things you are holding sacred, you are holding so tight, you are holding so close to you, actually didn't mean that much to the other person in the other part of the world. For example, the belief in religion. One of the things I share when I have opportunity is that for most part, religion is an accident of birth. I don't want to get into religion and politics in this interview, but just to use that as an example, is an accident of birth. And so what you believe in this part of the world may not mean anything to the other person in the other part of the world. And therefore, you need to become more cosmopolitan in your thinking, more embracing of diversity, as it were, in every aspect of life. So when we landed in Canada as a new immigrant, those things became very obvious to me because now I am in contact with people from almost all parts of the world. Canada is like a melting pot for immigrants. And as you go out in the city, as you interact with people all over the country, you begin to see that some of the things that were so precious to you actually didn't matter that much again because other people have lived, built up civilizations and live without those things. That doesn't mean that you now abandon who you are in terms of your core values. You need to hold those things down and yet understand that the other person doesn't have the same core value like you do. And therefore, you be generous and more tolerant of what the other people believe and their own way of life.
Well, they may have the same core value. They express it differently. I don't think there's any culture that says respect doesn't matter, but it's expressed in multiplicity of ways all around the world.
Yes, I agree. And that's a very good example. The way, for example, we parent in my culture and the way you parent in the Canadian culture, there are some slight differences. But at the end of the day, what is central is that the kids are precious to all of us and we cannot but protect them in the most vulnerable in our community.
That is true. I also really liked what you said a little bit earlier about that religion is an accident of birth for most people. And I 100% agree. And there's no rhyme or reason. You just happen to be born into a group that has a religious influence. And later on as an adult, you either consciously choose it or you consciously choose to not do anything about it, or you consciously choose something different. And that's been the source of huge contention and really the denial of human rights in many places in the world where people don't allow you to change beliefs. Or if you express something that's different than what the dominant belief would be, you could be tortured or imprisoned or killed. So I think the fact that you are recognizing that when people are born into a group that you don't know anything about, as you get older, you have to decide if you're going to do something about this or not. And also to what extent things are sacred. I think when you put that into question, some cultural practices are so important to keep and other cultural practices don't matter. And other cultural practices are just harmful. Every culture has all of those varieties of practices. And if we just, without questioning, accept them all, and then, in fact, go back to wherever we started from and assume that that culture hasn't changed, we're going to be very much shocked because while we were gone, the culture was changing.
Absolutely.
And so I remember a friend of mine from Rwanda was telling me about how wills and testaments were created in the area where she grew up. It all had to do with milk. And so the senior female in the family would have a pitcher of milk and would call the family together. And she would pour milk into different glasses and give them to different family members. And the order meant how she wanted her will and testament to be done. And she could change the order if she wanted to. So she wouldn't necessarily pick the firstborn. She might pick somebody who was most responsible, or she'd pick her nephew or a niece or something like that. So she would pick them in those first 5 or 6 glasses of milk. People paid very close attention to that. And when my friend came to Canada, she thought that was a really beautiful practice and she wanted to keep it. And I love the way she talked about it. And then she said, but other practices that didn't matter so much that she thought were really important when she got here, she realized maybe they didn't matter so much. Maybe she could let them go. And she started to make a few changes. But that one beautiful memory of her grandmother collectively bringing together this practice became something that she continued, and she taught her children to continue to do that, gave them cultural pride. And I loved the way she explained that. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It does. And this is the beauty of Canada. First, let's unpack some of this. First is that every time the human race had made progress, it is because we had questioned the things that we had inherited.
So true. That was beautiful. Wisdom. That's quotable. That's tweetable.
No, we've questioned received wisdom, and we have made progress by asking questions about whether those things are still relevant and to what extent they are relevant in the scheme of things that we, in the time where we are. And so the understanding that culture is not a static thing, it's something that evolves over time, it's something that cleans itself up, it's something that helps people to be the best they are at any given moment. It's something that we don't talk about a lot, but that's what it is. I'll give you an example. Sometimes when we come to the West, we have the impression that the West have a superior idea of empowerment for women.
Mm-hmm.
In my culture, for example, wives, daughters, and all that, you realize that you cannot grow your elder sister, right? If there were to be a problem in my home or in the brother family where we are born, my sisters who are married but who live in their husband's homes will come in to adjudicate on those positions, on those conflicts. Mm-hmm. And once they've taken a position, the men can't change it. The men can go and grumble in their rooms and everything. They can't change it. So we have this elevation of our sisters to the extent that they are like Supreme Court judges. They can do and undo their pronouncements are law. So if you do not understand all of those dynamics, you would think that this is the first time in human history, or that the Western culture is the only culture in human history that respects women. No, we have cultures where women actually play a much more definitive roles in the homes where they were born. And I can tell you for free, Maria, one of the things I miss in life is not having an elder sister. That big sister who can shield me from so many things. I see my friends who do, and I love the relationship they have with their elder sisters. And sometimes I wish I had one. So that tells you to the extent that culture is not static. It's not something that one is better than the other, or then you could migrate the ideas you have and impose them on the other people without knowing what has kept them going for centuries and years and ages. So your friend, the example of you showed about your friend is what Canada is all about for me, and why I'm proud to be in this country, which is that we are coming in and we have held close to some of those precious traditions that had been so important from where we're coming from, and we're using those kind of values to build up a collective society.
I really like what you just said, that every society has many things that are really worth keeping, and that there are things that really matter. And this idea of having a sort of group of elder sisters who are the family tribunal is really important. And I really like the way that you explained that. It made me think of this grandmother making these decisions that ended up impacting the entire family. And if she made that change, nobody questioned it, because that was a change that she had made after significant deliberation and probably consultation with others. So you followed it. And it's also an example of female empowerment in a society. And the Western idea of women having access is a little bit of a smokescreen, because if you still look at the dynamics of what's happening, as far as women may have more access to employment and education, but they're still not getting higher positions. They're still bullied out of the workplaces. They still face sexual harassment in every single country in the world. And it's not any better in the West than it is in any other country in the world. So gendered relations still have a long way to go from an international standpoint and from each national standpoint. And until we see women and men succeeding in equal numbers in every sphere of society, we haven't achieved it yet. And that would also mean that abuse in families is completely wiped from the face of the earth, that the one place where you should be secure in your family is actually the place where you can be secure. And that isn't the case right now in many homes, no matter what country. So and
it's good that and it's great that you mentioned the pay parity between men and women in the Western society. So the idea that a female gets more or less than me in the workplace because of the gender is something that I still do not understand, because where I'm coming from, you do the same job, you get the same pay.
Right? Where we haven't reached parity anywhere in the world. Anyone who does the job should get paid, but it doesn't happen. Actually, just a couple of years ago, just prior to COVID, a number of colleges and universities ended up having to pay class action suits against female professors and deans who were paid significantly lower than their male counterparts. So this is still something that goes on. And some of those things in culture can be harmful. Some can be really positive, and others can just be benign and doesn't really matter whether you do them or not. And they can just be interesting. But I think that you really brought that up in a lot of interesting ways. And you also said some really significant things about culture that very few people that I interview say. One of them is that culture is fluid and dynamic. And that is so true, because it's a social construct, and we're building it as as we go. So you don't get stuck in one particular place. I still remember a number of years ago when my mother-in-law was still alive, she was complaining about the names that her nieces and nephews were giving to their children when they weren't good traditional French names, you know? And so I said, well, what's a good traditional French name? And so then she said, well, you know, like the names of my children. So then she started to name her children's names. And I said, well, what were the names of your grandparents? And they were names that were like, nobody would ever name their kids these. Belzamir, and, you know, like all sorts of things that just would be considered very odd and dated now. And I said, but that was only 2 generations ago. So how long does tradition go back? And she was like kind of stumped. And she went, well, maybe traditional French names are just the names that I like in my generation. And I'm thinking it's traditional to give it more weight, which I thought was very humble of her to say.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end of the interview. And when people are hiring you for a job or they want to engage you with a business transaction, what brings out the best in Chidi? What brings out the best in you so that you can really work to your full potential? What do you need to be successful in a work relationship or in a workplace?
Giving me a sense of empowerment, and that empowerment is a clarity about what we need to do and allowing me to figure out how to do it. I don't think I will work so well with having with scripts, for example. I'll probably go off scripts, okay? Because I believe there are ways to do the job that might not be yet discovered. And part of what I'm trying to do every day to improve on my work is to find new ways of doing it and improve it. So the professions and the jobs that I've done that allow me that leverage to try new things, to engage in a journey of exploration, brings out the best in me. And one of the things I've also tried to get my team members to learn about, which is that what I have told you to do is just broad vision, broad ideas. You could work on it, you know, find ways to make it your own, find ways to ensure that you succeed in these things so that you work well, you do better than we expect. So giving me that sense of freedom, that room, you know, within which to operate, it's what brings out the best in me.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's an entrepreneurial mindset too. People succeed when they have, you know, freedom to build their ideas and then build the team in the way that they feel best. So yeah, thanks for saying that. Now, here's your soapbox moment. Tell us about your book and anything else you'd like to promote.
My book, Coming to Canada, The Ultimate Success Guide, is for new immigrants and travelers. It's not just about the settlement process. It's about some of the things I've learned through my journeys through life. I have incorporated most of them there, not just about the Canadian part of it, but also the things I've picked up from all the professions that I had and the journeys that have taken me up to this point. In it, I speak to everybody at any part of their life in this great country that we have adopted as ours. And it will be amazing. And it will be something great for you to pick up a copy of it and make a judgment for yourself about some of the nuggets in it.
Yeah, and it can be purchased on Amazon and probably other directories, Barnes and Noble, places like that, correct?
Yes, we are on all the major bookshops in the world, anywhere books are sold.
Right. And that will be in the show notes so that people can purchase it from your landing page as well. I think what stands out for me about the book, because it's written from personal perspective, it's got an African perspective, but also you can tell you've been traveling all over the world and you have this cosmopolitan, multicultural approach to things. And it's very well researched and applies to all provinces across Canada in ways that I haven't seen yet. I mean, people who are born here who are trying to write an immigrant guide usually falls pretty flat because they don't know what it feels like. And those are not usually so good. They tend to be preachy and not useful. And then other times people try to put something together, but they haven't put the necessary research into it to make sure that it's applicable. And they don't speak to things that really matter to people. A couple of chapters that stand out for me in your book. Really love the chapter on parenting. It really brings out thoughts and questions that help people to make decisions about parenting, because it's often a big shock to people when they move to another country, how different parenting is, and they feel like they don't have tools anymore and they're not sure what to do. And then the other one I really like is when you talk about political involvement, you know, the voting process and getting involved in a way where you're participating as a citizen in the country. And I haven't seen either of those done in the way that you do them. and other things too, like how to establish a credit rating, which probably comes from your banking background. But I have, helped many immigrants get established in Canada, and the whole credit rating piece and learning how to use credit cards is a mystery to many people from a whole variety of different countries. And so the way you explain it is just lovely, beautiful, really easy to grasp and get started on. So, I just want to congratulate you on the book and encourage people to purchase it.
Thank you, Maria. The book speaks to everybody and is written from knowing that people have these multicultural differences and approach, and people are coming from all parts of the world, including native Canadians, including people who are Canadian by birth. So it's something that I believe that, and I'll be very glad to get feedback, just like you just said, when people read this book and tell me which part of the book resonates with them the most. It makes my day, because it speaks to the level of love I put in writing it.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, I hope you get a lot of feedback and Google reviews and Amazon reviews.
I've got a couple of them.
That's good. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we close out today?
In talking about, in this conversation, it's clear that the biggest challenge that we have in life is the challenge of leadership, particularly personal leadership. It's my belief that we could go further, we could do bigger things if we could lead ourselves better before, even as we lead the organizations and the places that we part. And you mentioned something, Maria, which is very passionate to me, which is community involvement. Our communities are looking for leadership. Our communities are starved of leadership. So you live in a community and you are a CEO, you have all these skills that you could use, that you've been using to build up organizations, money for profit organizations. We need to get to a point where we begin to see how important it is to translate some of those skills, some of those experiences into working to improve our communities. I love the idea of neighborhoods, leagues. I love the idea of volunteering. It is one thing I know that Canada had so perfected well, but it's not something that we speak about a lot. It's something that we need to talk a little bit more, that you could bring all the skills, passion, experience that you have, and that there's a space for you on this table called community leadership.
Nice. Very nice. I love that. That's so well said. Well, Chidi, thank you so much for the interview today and for the gift of your time. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Maria, for having me.
Chidi Iwuchukwu was groomed to lead from the moment he was born. As the oldest in a strict Nigerian family, he was constantly reminded to be a role model and to achieve great things. From his family's military background, he went into a career in banking, where he excelled at using a direct manager style. His world travels and immigration to Canada, however, softened his approach to leading and gave him opportunities to add inclusive and indirect communication styles and multiple cultural approaches to his repertoire. Chidi's keen thinking, systematic approach, and attention to the needs of marginalized people brought him to his current leadership role in an organization that advocates for people with disabilities. His immigration experience inspired the writing of a book to help immigrants settle and integrate into Canadian culture. I enjoyed hearing Chidi's story and encourage you to pick up a copy of his book, Coming to Canada, The Ultimate Success Guide. Thank you for listening. Please share this episode with a friend and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. Hey, podcast listeners, help us reach our goal of 1,000 downloads per episode by going to followthepodcast.com/culture and leadership. That's followthepodcast.com/culture and leadership. If you type that into your browser and you use the and sign, not the word and, culture and leadership, it will automatically adjust to your phone. And then you can follow and rate. So followthepodcast.com/culture and leadership. Thanks in advance for following and for reviewing.